Well, I'm pleased to kick us off today. I'm Laura Winn Johnson. Thanks for that introduction, Ray. The title of my presentation is A 360-Degree Brand View, Identifying New Opportunities for Your Business. So first, what's the problem? Now, since I'm first up in this New York session, I thought I'd give us a bit of a context for the problem that many of us are going to speak to today from a variety of angles. You may recognize this bridge here from the movie True Lies. I thought it was a great representation of some of the major gaps in traditional research approaches. And that's why ethnographic research, I believe, has made such a valuable contribution to the marketing research world because of some of the gaps and limitations in research, things like our physical presence being counterproductive, as Ray mentioned in his earlier presentation. Usage patterns or behaviors that are very irregular or spontaneous or very habitual or in secret or very personal. And I'll talk a great deal today about complex, multifaceted decision processes. Now, based on my experience anyway in marketing research in general, as well as a wide range of ethnographic studies across industries really, I'd argue that our charge here is to creatively close that gap and address at least one key need. There are many, but one key need today is deeper, more contextual knowledge of our customers, so a more holistic research strategy. Now, you'll see that I'm subliminally working right in the circular images here today, so if you remember one thing about me, it would be the shape of a circle, because I'm talking about a 360-degree view. Now, this larger view, I'd argue, is critical to answer some key questions for the business, for the organization, so for the marketer and the brand manager. Things like, how do we see the world from our customers' perspective, see the world in their context, so the people, the media, the impressions, the attitudes that really influence them. In particular, where is your product, your service, your category? Where is it succeeding? Where is it failing? How are they making decisions in your category, particularly if your decisions are long or infrequent or involve multiple influencers? How do we pinpoint unmet needs that can generate new product ideas before your competitors can find them? More on innovation in a moment. And bring your target consumers to life or internal stakeholders to identify strategic priorities. Now, we've talked about some problems and gaps. Let's talk about some solutions. So Margaret Mead. Now, for many of you, this should conjure up images of traditional academic ethnographic research, so in-person physical observation of people. Now, while I'll always love the work of Margaret Mead, and this approach is pretty great for many verticals like consumer packaged goods, it does present a real challenge for other categories, especially ones like financial services and pharma, because these industries have behaviors that are very hard to observe. They're largely unseeable or not physically observable, and they often involve very complex and or private decisions, like an attitude or a decision process or perception, maybe a driving motivation. Now, this challenge, interestingly enough, has probably been the biggest inspiration for much of my own ethnographic design, and it'll inspire a lot of what I'm going to share with you today. Now, in my experience, for this kind of complexity, we have to go beyond traditional approaches with one that kind of makes the best of both worlds. And those two worlds are kind of leveraging the traditions, leveraging the traditional, like the principles of cultural anthropology, and balancing that with a modern twist. So ongoing creativity and applications that really advance us to this more authentic 360-degree observational framework. Here's that circle again. Now, I'm calling here for a clear connection between the category or the product and service and all of the ways that it affects how users think about themselves and their experiences in life vis-a-vis your category. Now, to be sure, anticipating all of these ways is an art to be sure, but we'll talk about some of that art today. Now, one way to do this is through combining research methods or multi-method research. Now, this slide, if you can put a snapshot of this in your brain, this is kind of our anchor or our outline for our brief time together. And there are, no surprise, 3 circles there in the middle of that page. First, the definition. When I talk about combining, I'm referring to utilizing various traditional research methods as part of a larger observational research design, such that the combination of those things creates something altogether new, a more robust 360-degree view. Now today we're going to touch on 3 specific aspects of this very intricate but creative process: technology, self-observation, and a longitudinal approach. So first, before we go into those 3, I wanted to give you a few examples of methods that you can kind of fold into a larger ethnographic design to customize your study. Some key benefits of this multi-method approach are that it's highly customizable. It's really tailored to the specific business objectives, your customer type, the types of behavior you need to observe, just about any nuance you have to cater to for your client. It also allows us to have our cake and eat it too, so to leverage the best parts of even traditional research methods and minimize the downsides of any one method alone. So much like a recipe in the kitchen, creative combinations get to something better than any one ingredient and gives us deeper, more compelling insights, ones that your competitors are unlikely to discover. Now, since we're talking about combining methods, I wanted to give you a couple of considerations. In this case, for example, if you were wanting a little bit of an in-person flavor but looking at digital as well, lots of things to take into account. Bring your attention in particular to any hunches that you might have about the behavior at work here. So maybe how frequently does it occur, how often, what are any patterns that we know about, and any reason to believe that they might do one thing and report another. That would be a good reason to include some in-person work at first, as well as your stakeholders' familiarity with the topic or the population. Now, the first of our 3 is technology. Now, we talked about gaps in traditional and even ethnographic research, and I'd argue that technology really helps close that gap, mainly by giving us options. So it facilitates that much more robust 360 view because it expands our ability, basically, to walk in customer shoes and move beyond in-person observation alone so that we aren't so limited in our reach. Now, I'm big on having my cake and eat it too, as you can tell, and technology enables us to enjoy both longitudinal views, which we'll talk about next, as well as the immediacy of in-the-moment activities and thoughts. So benefits here include things like greater flexibility and convenience for participants, giving us higher participation rates, more thoughtful responses, the research team having ongoing access to and interaction with respondents, things like greater insights into nuanced behaviors and attitudes, the ability to gather immediate reactions, and then finally, an opportunity to gather longitudinal data, both every day and over time. Now, let's talk about the last 2, and I want to ask you that if you remember only 2 things from today, I'll have you remember these final 2 things. So I'm going to spend some time here. Now, as you may remember, the final 2 circles were self-observation and a longitudinal approach. Now, self-observation. We talked about a key gap in traditional research and in ethnographic research, an inability to see the unseeable. And this is a particular issue, as I mentioned, for non-CPG. And I mentioned that this challenge has actually been a real stimulus and an inspiration for me as an ethnographer. Now, what do I mean by self-observation? You may recall Ray's continuum that he spoke to earlier about observation. And this fits squarely in the middle. This is where consumers explore and observe their own behaviors, their attitudes, their perceptions with an ethnographer's guidance. And a trained and experienced ethnographer can use many tools to enable consumers to act as the ethnographer's eyes and ears and to limit the impact on the behaviors themselves. That alone is a subject for a whole separate presentation, but in essence, carefully applied, this technique enables us to adapt classical ethnography to make even invisible behaviors and decision processes more visible. So perceptions, beliefs, decision processes, give categories like pharma, healthcare, financial services, and so on the rich insights they need. Some key benefits to this approach, to self-observation. So respondents are primed to observe deeper insights. It's often more representative of real life, particularly when compared to in-person observation alone. This is especially so when combined with a longitudinal approach, which we're going to talk about next. These 2 really work together closely, I believe. Using technology for an ever-expanding reach, we can collect all types of artifacts. We really have a wide reach here for self-observation if we leverage technology. And it's extremely cost-effective to boot. So it makes our clients happy there. Now, I wanted to give you one example here. One example is the use of what I like to call organic assignments. Let me explain. I often use this within a longitudinal study, which I'll speak to next. This is really one way that an experienced ethnographer can enable the consumer to take a cathartic and revealing journey of self-discovery related to their lives, emphasis on their, but a journey of self-discovery related to their own lives and your category with the brand's marketing team along for the ride. They can explore and become aware of deeply personal self-perceptions, attitudes, habits, and so on they've developed over time and about which they were previously unaware in many cases. More importantly, the organic nature of the assignments, if you will, allows consumers to take their respective journeys in whatever direction makes sense for them based on what they learn or recognize about themselves or their experiences along the way. Now, this ties us to a much larger point. This ties also into Ray's earlier point here about doing justice to the real people and to the lives that we're so privileged to observe. Now, it as well ties us to ethnographic design and its place in the larger organic marketing process. So the consumer as inspiration, the consumer as the front end of innovation, not an afterthought. So having real business and research objectives, holding to them to be sure, and having some structure there, but still staying open to whole new questions. Now again, this is a discussion topic all its own, like many points that we'll all make today, but the key point here is that part of employing self-observation in your ethnographic research really requires us to stay open to the challenge and the beauty of the unexpected. And I'd argue that it's the unexpected that brings us greater innovation and competitive advantage. There we go. Screenshot came on. Now, longitudinal observation finally. This is closely tied to self-observation. By longitudinal, I simply mean over time. So in my experience, this approach fills a gap in traditional approaches like IDIs or focus groups alone because they give us only one snapshot of the consumer's experience and only the aspects of which they're currently aware. And there's so much more to the overall puzzle than the individual pieces that can be seen in one day or with the day in the life approach alone. There are several key benefits here, but two that I'd call to your attention. One, the research process can really be a stimulus for self-discovery. It provides the consumer with a process and a stimulus for recognizing and then observing the behaviors and attitudes that are most critical to the brand and the category. And when done really well, can produce very high levels of self-revelation. So in essence, a longitudinal approach focuses on creating a process of self-discovery that goes well beyond what any moderator or ethnographer or even the consumers themselves could know or relate in any one sitting. And that ties into the beauty of the combination idea I'm speaking about today. So the level of self-revelation required to kind of crack the code of real behavioral change and very complex decision processes or behaviors, more time is required. That's why I'm arguing for a longitudinal approach in many cases. One shot just isn't going to cut it. Key example here would be adherence and compliance in the pharma world. Tough to crack, but we've done it very well with these techniques. Okay, now what makes ethnography successful? I'm going to leave you with a quick summary of today as well as some final thoughts about success. So in closing, all research has limitations, right? So including more traditional ethnographic research. The solution I would propose to you is ethnographic design that minimizes our impact as researchers and produces the most authentic view of consumers' thoughts, experiences, and behaviors, even the ones they don't consciously know they have. That is a real art, to be sure. And as we've seen today, one way to do this is a combination of research methods that should be creative and carefully considered, but it allows us to get to a more 360-degree view, one that both does justice to the people we're so privileged to observe, but also brings us the most innovative business decisions as a result. Now, I'll leave you with some considerations about what makes ethnography successful based on my experience. The last one I'll bring your attention to, and that is for me the most fun, and that's figuring out what's really next for the brand as a result, kind of connecting these dots and figuring out what to do with it all. It's particularly exciting and challenging particularly for the unexpected or the unwelcomed insights, ones that are so critical to the organization's success, but they require major changes, and that's hard. Still, as we know, research that remains open to the truth and the most authentic view of what's going on is the real foundation for competitive advantage.
Unmuted.
For our clients and stakeholders. So I look forward to your questions.